Thank you, Ingrid, and good afternoon, everyone. We're breaking one of the cardinal rules of market research, which is never talk about it after lunch. So I beg your indulgence. I have a presentation for you on impact assessment, understanding how audiences are affected emotionally, intellectually, socially, culturally, by arts programs. So it'll be a little theoretical, so if you stay awake, if you're still awake in 45 minutes, I will know I've had an impact. So thank you for your attention as I go through this. We'll have about 15 or 20 minutes for questions, so as I go through, please make note of your questions so that we can have a discussion about this. But thank you so much for the invitation to be here. It's my first time in Norway. It's such a beautiful and special country, and thank you. It's not an easy time to be an American now. Our election, I assure you, will be over in 2 weeks, and then we'll go back to, hopefully, normal life. To whom are you accountable? Are you accountable to your audiences, to your larger community, to your elected officials who authorize your funding? And how do you provide evidence of your impact as an organization? My presentation will really cut to the core of these questions. We're very good at counting money, at box office money and taking attendance, but do these figures really explain the impact of your organization? And what evidence do you have? Do you stand in the lobby? Do you stand in your exhibition halls and watch people? And I think this is actually one of the greatest sources of data in our industry, is we sit in the hall and we watch people experience the art, and we learn every time that happens. I've been involved in studying audience impact for almost 10 years, and it all started with this book. It's called Gifts of the Muse. There's a title for you, Gifts of the Muse, Reframing the Debate about the Benefits of the Arts. The Wallace Foundation is a big philanthropic foundation in New York. They funded this study. It's about a $500,000 literature review on the benefits of the arts, the benefits of arts participation. It's very dense. If you put it by your bedstand and read it, you'll go right to sleep. But it could be the most important thing you read, because it speaks to how people are transformed by your programs. So this came out in 2005, and I got involved. It was very difficult. The Wallace Foundation was publicizing this, and most people were not interested. It was very academic, very theoretical. People would fall asleep. And there was a meeting, I'll tell you where this all started. There was a meeting in New York City in the offices of the Wallace Foundation, and I was sitting around a conference table with 10 other, consultants and political leaders. And the gentleman who was the lead researcher on this study made a very forceful presentation of the results, because it's very theoretical, and arguing that the real benefit of the arts is intrinsic and cannot be measured. And he finished, and then he opened it up for questions, and of course no one had any questions, right? It was that awkward moment. So I put my hand up. I said, "Excuse me, but you've been telling us for 10 years that we have to measure our outcomes, and you're finally telling us that the real benefit of the arts is intrinsic and cannot be measured." And Ed Pauley, the director of evaluation at the Wallace Foundation, turned to me and he said, "Alan, if you can describe something, you can measure it. If you can describe something, you can measure it." And it took me so long to understand what he meant. That if you can articulate a phenomenon, you can design questions that would elicit data that will help you understand the phenomenon. So that moment right there empowered me to think, maybe we can understand how audiences are affected by art. We haven't learned how. So I went back, this is the diagram from the book. This is before infographics. There are intrinsic benefits and instrumental benefits. I know that language is difficult. Art as an instrument of achieving some other benefit. So an instrumental benefit would be children have experienced social benefits, for example, of participating in the arts. That's an instrumental benefit. Intrinsic, and then they had on this, private benefits to public benefits. And then in the middle, private benefits with public spillover. And people were looking at this saying, oh my God, what does this mean to me? This is $500,000 worth of research. And I said, you know what? I think we could do better. So a year and a half later, I contacted Wallace Foundation. Is it okay with you if I go back into this wonderful book and I try to make something out of it? And this is a long story, and I'm sorry for those in the back of the room, you can't read this. But I just wanted to create a little map of the benefits of participating in arts and culture. And I just changed the axes a little bit. On the horizontal axis, you have individual benefits, right? The benefits that accrue to you when you participate. You have interpersonal benefits. We all talk to people who come and they have important social benefits, interacting with other people, and community benefits, of course. And then on the vertical scale, I changed it from intrinsic to instrumental. I said, let's just put in a time dimension. So there are benefits that occur during the experience itself. There are benefits that occur actually before, when people prepare, or at home, particularly with children going, they're very excited, they get all dressed up. When they arrive, they're energized already before. And benefits that occur after, and then benefits that are cumulative and accrue over your lifetime. So it's a simple two-dimensional space, and there are 5 spheres of benefits. Starting out here, the economic and social benefits. A lot of people talk about economic impact. My favorite is harm avoidance, right? It's like kids who do arts programs stay in school and don't get in gangs. That's harm avoidance. It's a great benefit. I don't have time to go through this in any detail. Communal meaning is this wonderful sphere of benefits that occur at the community level, but are close in proximity to the experience. So political dialogue, the theater provides a way for citizens to argue about politics. Dance also, there's political dance. Arts as a means of political dialogue is a wonderful community benefit. I wish we had more of that in the US now. We have a lot of dialogue to happen in the next 4 years. Creating shared memory. I love this. I don't know, you have these traditions here. We have the Nutcracker, where every Christmas people go over and over again. In the theater field, we have A Christmas Carol. Orchestras sometimes do Handel's Messiah every year. We have these rituals, right, where people go. It's like, why are they going? They've seen the program 100 times. But it's meaning. It's the transfer of meaning from generation to generation. And so much of the value of the arts is people revisiting familiar work. In the middle here, we have human interaction benefits. You know, I love people talk. They go out with their spouse or partner or boyfriend or girlfriend, and they talk about the art, and they're getting to know each other aesthetically. A great sphere of benefits. Then up here, personal development. You know, how are you a better person because you've participated in arts programs? Right, and I wish all of you, if I stopped you on the street and said, how do you make people better human beings? You would have an answer. And it's true, you make people better in so many ways, increasing creative competence, building critical thinking skills. I mean, there's a lot of research here with arts education, with children, but not so much with adults. And then finally down here, in the lower left-hand corner is the imprint, the benefits that occur during the experience itself. And when I say intrinsic impact, this is what I mean, is the benefits that occur in the immediate proximity of the experience itself. There are health benefits, particularly with active participation, dancing. And I will go through these intrinsic impacts now, but I just wanted to situate the intrinsic impacts in this larger constellation of benefits so that you could see what we're talking about today. So there's heightened interest now in impact assessment. When I was talking with Ingrid earlier, she said, many of the organizations in Norway are primarily funded by the government, and there's a lot of interest in impact. How are you impacting the public? Because I said, you really want to talk about impact assessment after lunch at your conference? And she said, yeah. So funders are increasingly demanding, especially in the UK. Now the funders are requiring quality assessment. We can talk about that later if you want. But I think organizations themselves are frustrated that they're not able to tell their story of how they actually transform people's lives. And so we're reduced to giving box office figures or attendance figures. When we know that doesn't tell our story. And we see people having transformative experiences every night. So it really, this is just a way of trying to surface a new vocabulary of talking about how people are transformed by our programs. So over the years, the basic hypothesis I've been trying to test with research is one of impact is a combination of readiness to receive, which is just a phrase of, I'll define it in a moment, but an individual's preparedness to have an experience and their experience itself, and that these things amount to the intrinsic impact. So we've done many studies. I'll refer to a number of studies today. Just very briefly, the constructs of readiness are context, like how much do you know about the experience you're about to have? It's not necessarily required to have a fantastic experience. You don't have to know a lot, but different people in your audience, I mean, imagine, you're looking at an audience here. Some people know an enormous amount about what they're about to see, and other people have no information at all. So context, relevance is the extent to which you are familiar, or that this kind of aesthetic is familiar to you or relevant to your life. So there are some people in the audience who maybe it's their first dance performance ever. And there are other people who've been going all their life. And those are two different, very different people. And then anticipation, which is an emotional state, of heightened emotional state. And we've struggled to measure the anticipation level because we know different people have different levels of anticipation. Some people are dreading because their wife dragged them to the theater, right? And other people are very excited. So I'm not going to go into this any further than just saying that readiness to receive is very much a factor influencing impact, and I'll show you at the very end how. But let's talk about the five constructs of intrinsic impact. And this comes from years and years of research and experimentation with surveys. But captivation, sort of personal involvement, right? Captivation. There was a wonderful book written by a psychologist in 1990. His name was Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, and he wrote a book called Flow, The Theory of the Optimal Experience. And it was a very popular book. It crossed over into popular culture. And his theory was that being fully absorbed in whatever you're doing is the root of happiness. So whether you're washing the dishes or mowing the lawn or gardening, if you're fully absorbed in what you're doing, you release yourself in a way, and you become fully captivated, and that state of consciousness he calls flow, a state of flow. And I believe this is very relevant to those of us who produce the arts. We want our audiences to be fully absorbed and achieve a state of flow. And when they do, I think that is an outcome. I think people go out to get lost in the art and really lose track of time and forget about all their problems for even a few minutes, and that achieving a state of flow. So we've designed questions to try to measure captivation. It's, at any point, did you lose track of time and get fully absorbed? This is what data looks like. I'm citing results from a study I just finished a few months ago of the concert programs of 26 choruses, 104 separate programs. And captivation levels range from an average of 4 and 4.5 on a scale of 0 to 5 to, they're above average, but some programs, people are more captivated than others. Right? Now, we have to be very careful not to say it's bad or good. Different works of art are more captivating than, some works of art are more captivating than other works of art. And it turns out that the higher scores here are for the oratorios, the full-length classical works. And there are also a sample of youth choruses, children's choruses in here. It's very different to see. So you can measure captivation. It's subject to interpretation, of course. And then we were able to look at sort of, okay, let's take the people who reported low captivation levels, and we looked at their open-ended questions, like why? Well, they're uncomfortable in their seats. Some choirs perform in churches with wooden pews, and they're uncomfortable. Or the sound is not good. It's too loud, or it's not loud enough. Or they didn't like the selection of music. There are reasons why people are less captivated or more captivated, and it just asks me to, it prompts me to challenge you as arts managers. What can you do to maximize the likelihood of captivation? The art itself is the main driver, but the way you welcome people into your venue, the temperature, making sure people are comfortable. I think there's a lot we can do as organizations to maximize captivation. And captivation is the linchpin, is the key factor of impact. Emotional resonance. This is very tricky. People are affected emotionally by art. And it's so situational. I don't know if that translates, but different people can see the same work of art and have totally different feelings about it, which is good. And we have to be very careful not to be judgmental. So some works of art are designed to disturb people, right? So we have to be agnostic as to the kind of emotion, whether people are happy or sad. That doesn't matter. What we want to measure is just the strength of the emotion. So overall, how strong was your emotional response to the program? And there's different ways. Did you in the theater particularly, did you feel a connection to one of the characters or artists? And then we love to ask, okay, how did the performance or exhibition make you feel? Please answer with one word. You may answer up to 6 words. That's how we answer it, right? How did the performance make you feel? Answer with one word. Because we can make word clouds out of that. So this is good. Just the average emotional response is very high across all these choral programs. People, had strong emotions for many of these programs. But you really want to find out what were you feeling, right? So in this particular study, we got 34,400 answers, which when we deduplicated was 3,061 unique words. And then many of those words were similar. This was a coding nightmare. We had to put them together. But this is your audience speaking to you in their words. The top of the list is just feeling happy and sort of festive, right? And then you go down, inspired, the spiritual aspect of choral music concerts is very distinct. I was inspired. And then relaxed, calm, serene was another. I mean, a lot of people go out to arts events just to be comforted and to feel serene. I won't read these, you can see, moved, so forth. And it's interesting, you get all the way down towards the bottom and you have sad. But it does, and so the question is, well, in what kinds of programs were making people sad? And it turned out there were a number of programs that were more challenging, thematic, programs about homelessness that actually did have that. So, I just love these word clouds. So these are 2 productions of Carmina Burana, which is very boisterous music, right? Excited. I was moved, happy, thrilled, amazed. Contrast that to the Arvo Päret's Passio, very kind of abstract vocal piece. Again, moved and inspired, but also you see here contemplative, calm, meditative, a different emotional footprint. And this is Duruflé's Requiem. Beautiful, beautiful, ethereal piece of music, peaceful. And, it shows. And this just, when you're selecting repertoire, you're curating impact. Because different works of art have different emotional footprints. This program was by an ensemble in Minneapolis called Cantus, and this was a program where they invited disadvantaged youth, choruses, youth from disadvantaged communities to sing. And it was a program that dealt with difficult issues of homelessness, disenfranchised, And here, you people were moved and grateful, but you also have frustrated, angry, sympathetic, reflexive. You start to see a more complex emotional range for some of these programs. And then finally, I just love this, parents at concerts by their children. They're proud, of course they're proud. They're so proud and happy. And that just, shows you. So this is just word clouds. This is simple stuff, folks. You can ask these questions. You can connect to the software. It's so easy to do. So I ask you, what is the emotional footprint of your program? So if, trying to be a good scholar here, I went and researched, there was the psychologist who made the wheel of feelings. So if you ever wake up some morning and don't know how to feel, here are your choices. And I just said, where are choruses operating in this, big circle of feelings? And this is where they are. I'm sure this would be very different for theater, right? Particularly more experimental theater or theater about contemporary issues. And so it's a choice. It's like, where do you want to operate? And what programs are you bringing forward to do that? All right, intellectual stimulation is just thinking. Being stimulated to consider, perhaps reconsider your own beliefs. That's a very difficult outcome to achieve. Did you gain new insight or learning? Were your eyes open to a point of view? By the way, I'll make this presentation available through the NPU, so you don't have to write down all these questions. And my favorite question of all, did you leave with unanswered questions you'd like to ask the artist or the performer, right? And it's like, be careful what you ask, you might get answers. And people are very good at answering these questions, because they actually answer with a question. And for me, this is great. For artistic directors, this is great data, because you're not asking people if you liked it or hated it. You're asking people, what questions did you have? And some works of art generate a lot more questions than other works of art. So this is a different study of theater audiences, but 35% of audiences said they left with unanswered questions, and more younger people said they had questions. I don't know if this is, just inquisitiveness of youth, or if older folks have sort of been there, done that, seen everything, and I don't have questions. But it's fascinating that the younger people are more likely to have questions. And then different kinds of theater generated more questions than others. So experimental theater, 51%, of course, it's experimental. They have questions. As opposed to over here, musicals, no one really has questions about Mamma Mia, right? And if they do, I really want to have a focus group with them. But the whole point is that you can look at your programs and which works will generate more questions. And I think this connects with the session I did this morning about making sense of audience engagement. It's like you can anticipate which programs will generate a need for more engagement. And what's interesting is when you actually analyze the questions, most people are asking sort of, why did you choose to have this program? Right, what's the curatorial impulse? Give me some insight. I call that the moment of curatorial insight, when people understand why you chose a work of art for them. Right? It's not the biographies of the artists which is what we tend to publish, right? People want to know why, even just a little bit. What inspired you to bring this work to us? Aesthetic enrichment, of course, this is what artistic directors prize. And this started out early on as aesthetic growth. It was like stretching people, exposing them to something new and challenging. But actually, a lot of the aesthetic value in the whole art system is from people revisiting familiar works because they don't want to be challenged. They want to be comforted. So we needed a construct here that embraces both of those things, being challenged and also being comforted. So I just call this aesthetic enrichment. And then you can ask people, were you exposed to something new? And in the case of courses, was it a new composer, new pieces, a new style? You can design these questions to suit your own needs. And then we also have to ask people if the program served to remind them of a work of art they know and love, right? It's a little more difficult asking that. And I won't go into much of the results except just to say, you can calculate what percentages of your audience you are exposing to new work, if this is one of your outcomes. Okay, social bridging and bonding. And let me just do a time check here. Okay. All right, this is important. Social bridging, this goes back to the work of Robert Putnam, who wrote a famous book called Bowling Alone in 2002. And he defined social bridging and social bonding. Social bonding is the feeling closer to your people, right? Social bonding happens at sporting events, it happens at arts programs, but it's when you are growing closer to the people in your social group. Social bridging is learning about or connecting with people who are different than you, people from a different background. These two things, of course, can happen simultaneously in the same audience, depending on who you are. And we've developed very simple survey questions for measuring both of these. So this wonderful thing that happens of feeling a sense of connection with other people. It's very difficult to measure, but it's very real. When an audience laughs together, or an audience is surprised by a turn in the plot. When audiences have this common experience, and what's so frustrating to me is the way our venues are designed. All you see is the back of someone's head. And we're humans, we instinctively imitate each other. So when you can see the faces of other audience members, you can relate to them in a way that you cannot in a dark hall with conventional seating where all you see are the backs of heads. So I always love to be in venues that are semicircles or where you can actually see the faces of other audience members. And for some, particularly like music concerts, keep the house lights up a little bit so people can see the faces of other audience members because it will enhance their emotional experience. It frustrates me to no end when I get into a hall and there's like this wonderful jazz band on the stage and the house lights are black and you can't see anything except the one performer, It's a collective experience. So social connectedness, we can measure it. It's very ephemeral. To what extent did the program celebrate your cultural heritage? or express part of your identity. That's bonding, social bonding. And social bridging is to what extent did you gain a new appreciation for a culture other than your own, social bridging. Right, so these are some of the questions we've been exploring. Social bridging is not a feature of many arts programs. World music is a great source of social bridging. People go and they learn about a music tradition of a different culture, right? But they also, those same programs, attract people from the culture, from the specific culture being performed, and those people have bonding experience, and other people in the same audience have bridging experience. You understand? The two things can happen simultaneously. And I think this is where marketing becomes so important, because you can curate an audience where both bridging and bonding outcomes happen at the same time. So I looked deeply at 5 concerts. They were concerts celebrating the heritage of Dr. Martin Luther King. So they were African American tradition. The choruses were singing hymns and spirituals. And I looked at the data on African American respondents versus others in the audience, and the African American respondents reported 3.5 times the social bonding outcomes as others. So we see this, and then the interplay is just these two things happen together, and it's almost like magic when they happen together. And you can curate programs that create social bonding outcomes and social bridging outcomes for your community. I mean, it's part of the art, but out of all of this, I would love for arts organizations to just understand and make clear decisions that curating art is curating impact. And the decisions you make about programming selection affect the emotional well-being of your community. Okay, just a couple more things. This is difficult data. I mean, it's not rocket science, surveying audiences. And there's a lot of lively discussion to be had about how much is too much, how much to ask of your audience. I think that if you do it well, that the act of providing feedback is actually part of the audience engagement cycle, right? That inviting people to share their critical reaction to a work of art is actually part of the experience, artistic experience. Now, we don't set it up that way. Most of the time we survey people, we ask them, how satisfied were you on a scale of 1 to 10, and would you recommend us to a friend? And they push send on the survey and they never hear anything about it, And I think that's a problem. So I don't think every organization should do impact assessment work, because especially if you don't really want, don't ask questions you don't want the answers to, because the answers could provoke you in ways that you don't anticipate. But I do believe that there's a certain segment of audience members who really love to tell you how they feel. You probably get letters from them anyway. And I think we can cultivate this. And particularly in today's culture, I mean, people are asked all the time to provide feedback on everything. Everything. And it's maddening sometimes. But what we hear from people who take our impact surveys is we've never been asked these questions before. And I think we could actually do education. We could do education work with the audience to explain why it's important that they give us feedback. Strengthening the internal process. So, how would you know, for example, if your post-performance discussion had an impact. Well, you have to measure that impact, and there are ways of measuring that. And this is really just developing a more sophisticated understanding of how your work affects audiences. That has to be from the top of the organization. If your artistic leader doesn't really care, and I've had this lively debate with many artistic directors, and it's been difficult, honestly, for me, because I'm an advocate for the audience. They really don't want this kind of feedback. It's not going to change the way they select programs. And I've had to accept that. But I've also met other artistic leaders who are very interested in audience feedback, and it's not threatening to them, it's just another source of information. And from my standpoint, it's like you can only benefit from feedback unless you do it poorly, and then it's a liability, I think. All right. Also, you can use impact data to communicate with your external stakeholders, of course. I've seen arts groups actually publish word clouds on the front of their brochures of emotions. And also, taking focus off box office results or attendance results and actually changing the conversation to impact. At least it opens the possibility of being transparent. But be careful, because if you commit, this is not advocacy, this is evaluation. And it just annoys me when arts groups only take the positive comments and try to portray that as being representative when actually they have lots of challenging data also. So for me, this is about welcoming critical feedback on your work, which is a hallmark of professionalism, I think. So a final word, a couple final words. One is being strategic about this. It's like, again, don't do it if you're not ready for it. Or maybe experiment with it a little bit and see if it makes sense for you. There are a few arts organizations who survey every audience member after every show. Center Theater Group in Los Angeles. Every ticket buyer gets an email with a survey after every show. And they've accumulated so much data over 10 years that they know from their survey results how well the show is going to sell, actually. They have early indicators. But other organizations mostly just do impact assessment around their more challenging artistic work, because they're more interested in knowing how specific productions or specific exhibitions resonate with audiences. I again think that we have asking an audience member to fill out a survey is like a contract. And unless to fulfill the contract, I believe we have to share something back to them after they're finished. Most people hit send, submit on the survey, and it's gone. They have no idea where the data goes, no idea if anyone looks at it, right? But now we have the technology where after they finish a survey, they can jump to a web page that actually shows them the results. And they can see if their opinions are similar or dissimilar to what other patrons are saying. That's kind of scary, reflecting, being transparent about feedback. But I think this turns it into an educational experience for the survey taker, which is very important. And then thank them for it. So I just want to close by saying that there are very important limitations to this work. And some of my colleagues in other countries disagree with me about the limitations. But my experience with this is that it's very dangerous to compare impact results across organizations and across art forms, across cities, across venues. So impact data is inherently situational and contextual. And then the art itself, some art, different works of art have different impacts. And as soon as you start measuring it, our impulse is to turn it into a competition for the highest score. But in fact, some works of art are designed to disturb people, so you would see low scores on some of these measures, and that would indicate success. So it's very difficult, I think, to roll up this data, aggregate this data across cities and even nationally, as is happening, as are about to happen now in the UK. So it's complicated, but you can ask questions of your audience that will elicit information. And if we do it really well, the process of giving feedback can be part of the experience itself and really magnify the impact. So far, I don't see anyone sleeping. So I'm very grateful to you for your attention. Thank you. We have a little time for questions now. Oh, no, wait a minute. I have one more slide. All right. Hang on. This is as bad as it gets. And I swear this is my last slide. So how does this all work together, right? So we try to actually diagram this using statistical association. So, remember I started with readiness to receive? So familiarity, preparation, the sense of feeling welcome actually has a positive association with the anticipation level, right? So everything you do to prepare people heightens their anticipation. But you don't need to have preparation to have impactful experience. But when it can magnify anticipation, anticipation is highly correlated with captivation. Of course it is. The more excited you are, the more captivated you're likely to be. Right? That's why captivation is, it goes all the way back to anticipation. There's also a direct correlation between anticipation and impact. My question for summative impact is, a year from now, how well will you remember this? Right? You're asking people to anticipate a year from now, if they'll remember this experience. And people say, no, I won't remember this probably. Or some people say, oh, absolutely. And that's an indicator of impact. Right? Captivation is highly, highly associated with impact. All the post-performance engagement stuff you do is very predictive of impact, right? Much more so than the preparation. Here you have an indicator of 0.13, here you have an indicator of 0.15. Right, correlations are high here. So this is kind of and then you hope that people who have impactful experiences will become loyal and will come again, but of course they don't. We have 80% churn, right? So that's where this whole thing breaks down. Is you kill yourself, you prepare people, they have incredible experiences, and then they don't come again, right? And honestly, we have to figure this out, or maybe they come every 3 years. But I just wanted to put the whole picture together, sort of, So I honestly, you can justify investments in audience engagement because they magnify impact. We can statistically prove, right, that investments in post-performance engagement, in pre-performance engagement actually affect anticipation, which heightens captivation, which magnifies impact. Okay, that's it. Sorry. All right, so we have a short time. I'm just going to come down here and take some questions. I know this is tough stuff, so I give bonus points. You get bonus points for any questions that you could ask. Is anyone brave enough? Or just a comment? You could just say, I hate taking surveys. Yes.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
My name is Egil Bjørnsen. I work for, I run a development agency for the performing arts in Copenhagen. I read your work on audience engagement, which I really, really enjoyed. And it's influenced me a lot. But I have some questions to your approach today. And I'm glad you put up that limitation slide as the second of the last. I'm not of those who sort of put up this sort of clear distinction between intrinsic value and instrumental value. I think we're beyond that.
Yeah. And
of course we should not be afraid of looking into impact. But we also know that this is extremely complex, as you say. And I think arts organizations should be really careful before they sort of allow themselves into this, because there are so many pitfalls.
Yeah.
And to use this as a way of getting audience insight, I think can be good. Your word clouds are nice and all that, but to use it in a sort of part of a legitimation strategy, or using it to sort of convince your stakeholders, I think people should be really, really careful. Because what if you cannot sustain it? What if you're using a kind of instrumental agenda and you cannot sustain it? Then your whole legitimation might have been wiped under your feet.
Right.
So I think you need the intrinsic value is still so important, and we need to sort of. And it's the same with economic impact, which we've seen numerous cases of how that kind of discourse is difficult to sustain, and then you're left there with nothing else to fall back on.
Right. Right.
So and for example, your choral music example, which is delightful and it's nice, but you could use an example like that on almost any human activity, really. I mean, you could ask people about how they feel about walking in the woods, or how they feel when they do sports, or doing the dishes, or whatever, So I'm very cautious for individual organizations to go down that kind of instrumental route, advocacy route.
Thank you.
Comments?
I share your skepticism, and I fear that there's great potential for misuse of this information. I had one artistic director say, are you telling me if I got a 3.9 on spiritual value this year, I have to get a 4.0 next year? And it's a real concern. The moment we quantify something, it becomes a benchmark, and in some ways becomes limiting. Other questions or comments?
Hello.
Hello.
I work in the National Theatre, and I must say that though I agree about what can be problems about this, I must say we have been doing this. I'm not sure if it's the same, but it is called the Audience Experience Framework. Is it the same, maybe? I don't know. I just Googled it.
Oh, that was from Australia. Yeah,
but
I
actually Googled it when I was new in the theatre business, and I didn't. How can we measure it? Because we just measure audience visitor, how many come, how much money do we make, and I'm an economist, and I know that what you measure is what you do. That's like in every organization. So it's really dangerous to not measure this, because this is really the core of our existence. What we do, what we deliver, why we are here, and why we get so much money from the government and the taxpayers. So I think, of course, it has some limitations, but I really mean that it's so important to go this road. Yeah. And we have been doing this really, really basic level for like 2.5 years. And what we have learned is that we have to do more, and we have to be more precise, and also that we really get to talk to our audience, or with our audience, in a more profound way. And I think that also our audience, of course, some has some issues, but they really feel that they are treat it with more like it's more substance, the thing we measure now. So I'm really really glad that you came here, and I think it's really, I don't know if other theaters or museums do the same, but we are doing a little bit of it, and I think it has been really interesting to hear you talk, and it's not a question, it was really just, yes, let's do this, it's nice. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Other questions, comments? You had your hand up here, yes.
Hello? Hello? Hi. Yeah, I just want to say a little bit the same as she said. I don't...
What's your organization?
It's a Bit 20 Ensemble. It's a small contemporary music group. But I think that what you always search for is to try to say something about this. I see what he says, and I see this. You can't use it really instrumental, but this is what you try to tell when you tell both the audience and the funders. You try to really go into it. So I think it's it's something there, even if you...
I mean,
and it's also a way of engaging with the audience in different ways. So just a comment.
I mean, another technique that I encourage you to experiment with is retrospective interviewing, where you would interview audience members about experiences they had a year ago or 2 years ago and ask them what they remember. And that would be another way of sort of getting at some of these impacts, without surveying people about the immediate experience. Because really what we want to know is like what's the totality of your impact as an institution on your community? And that's a big, that's a big question. But I mean, I'm sure some of you in different communities here in Norway, you actually touch maybe 20% of all adults in your community, 10%, 20%, I don't know. But that's a lot of people. You actually touch a large percentage of the adult population. So, why don't we try to understand what is the accumulated impact of your institution on your community? I think retrospective interviewing is one technique. And you all can do interviews. You don't need to hire expensive consultants to do good interviews. You just need a good protocol